So, hopefully you'll realise why I'm wearing a hat. There's another instalment of The Good Man and the Bad Man. This should be the lesson you're doing after the deforestation lesson. So it follows on from that. And I'm going to talk a lot about biodiversity today, but we'll get to that in a minute. So, quick recap, pause, try your best. And now you've done that. What deforestation is the destruction of the rainforests and any other forests and the reduction of the plants and trees available. Why does deforestation happen? So if you think back to last lesson, we've got using land for farming, using land for buildings, roads. Particularly the farming bit would be cattle and rice. Name one greenhouse gas. Now you could have put 3 down here. Hopefully you've got all 3 stuck in your head. So you've got carbon dioxide, and remember most people know that one. And then your other 2 would be methane and water vapour. The destruction of peat bogs and using peat bogs and releasing the stuff that hasn't quite rotted away over hundreds of years, that would be carbon dioxide. And name one place where deforestation happens. The most obvious answer would be the Amazon, but you may have named other places. So moving on. Now, it does seem like there's an awful lot of words on this page, but I'm just going to go to the pen for a second. No, I don't want that one. What I'd suggest you do is here we have heathland, wetland, mangrove and coral reef. Now these are 4 very specific types of ecosystem, and there's a little description next to them, but I would actually now, if I was you, pause, go on to wherever you search with Google or Safari or even Bing, and the best thing to do is just go onto the images and just type coral reef and have a look at the images, so you've got an idea in your head that if you ever see the words coral reef, that's what it means. Mangrove, that's what it means. A wetland, that's what it means. And heathland. So rather than trying to imagine it, if you already know what those are, don't worry about it so much. We've got deforestation and global warming down the bottom there, and there are already things we've done. And the other one I'll just point out, and what we want to talk today is, and key thing, biodiversity. So last lesson, we've done quite a lot on global warming, we've done quite a lot on deforestation, but now biodiversity. Anyway, get rid of that for a bit because it's itching my head. So, biodiversity. Bio, as we've pointed out in a few lessons now, this is simply meaning living. Living organisms. The study of, try and get that better, there you go. So it actually looks like I can write. Biology, the study of living things. The biosphere, the part of the planet living things can exist in. Biogas, gas produced when living things decompose. So bio is anything to do with living, and we had those biotic factors, things that might affect you in your environment, but all living things. And then the second word there, diversity. And we live in a very diverse society in England. We've got people from all sorts of backgrounds and cultures, and diversity is lots of difference. So by saying we live in a diverse society, there's a wide range of backgrounds and heritage and different origins for people. So biodiversity would be a wide range of living things. Please pause now, and that absolutely in bold, highlighted in a box in your glossaries, so that it's not a confusing word and it's not one of those things that sort of forget. Biodiversity simply meaning the range of different living things.
I just want to grow more and more pigs on this lovely farm. I've got loads of mouths to feed, and we can get all these pigs out to the customers. Who cares about the land when we've got these lovely pigs? Look at this pig here, look, and this pig here. Oh, he's having a sleep, we'll let him sleep. And then we got this other pig, all these lovely pigs to feed all these people.
You do seem a little bit fixated on pigs. The problem is, if you just have a few species, then you're completely unstable in the environment. If we have a nice biodiverse environment, with all these creatures that normally live together, like here the rhinoceros making friends with a sheep, and the tiger watching the two chickens have a lovely little peck on the cheek. By keeping a wide range of animals, the environment is much more stable, and that's our biodiversity.
In a stable community, there's loads of different organisms, all interdependent on each other. And that's much healthier than just a few organisms all of the same type. It means it's much more stable.
So, here we have two examples. In the Arctic, where it's got 5,500 different species of organism, and then in the rainforest here, where it's got 10 million different species, the rainforest is a much more diverse. There's a lot more biodiversity there than there is in the Arctic. So, quite easy questions, scribble the answers down to. Which one of those ecosystems is more biodiverse, Arctic or rainforest? Which sentence best describes biodiversity out of these? And if you listened to what I said a minute ago about what the word means, that's easy. And those are your answers. So, if we look at this food web for the Arctic, here, the ringed seal and the harbour seal, they're both feeding on Arctic cod. If we overfish the cod, that's going to have serious implications on the number of harbour seals and on the number of ringed seals. That means, what is Mr. Polar Bear going to eat? So, there's not much biodiversity in this food web. And we did food webs back in probably the third lesson of this when we're talking about feeding relationships. And now, because we've lost those cod by overfishing from people, for example, and because there's not much biodiversity, they didn't have other food sources to eat. Now, if you compare that with this sort of food web, a lot more complicated, well, because there's such a wide range of things, usually organisms here may, if they're consumers, may actually eat 5, 10, 15 other things. So if something happens to one of them, you're still okay, because you've still got all the rest that you can eat. And that makes it a lot more stable. So the important thing about the biodiversity there is it's stable. Sorry about the quality of this pen. Okay. If you need to pause and just write about the difference between the Arctic and the Amazon, or the Arctic and the rainforest, and about one being stable and one not. Okay, see if you can complete this sentence. So you've got the key words to put in. An ecosystem with a higher biodiversity, so that rainforest one, is more stable because, we can talk about the variety of things and depending. I'll let you have a go at that, so make sure you pause before going on. And then we've got this. So, an ecosystem with lower biodiversity is less stable. Organisms may depend on a variety of organisms for food, shelter, and the environment. So if one organism were to die out, there would be other options.
So, what's wrong with having this farm anyway? We've got the need, we want to grow these lovely little pigs, we've got all this lovely wheat, we can have the wheat fields, we can have the farm, everyone's happy, we can feed the people. What's wrong with it?
It's completely unstable. You've lost all your biodiversity. I mean, you can do farms and we need food for people, but instead of having massive great big fields for wheat, what about putting the hedges back? Because if you put the hedges back into those fields, there's a place for the hedgehogs to live. The hedgehogs play their part in the community. Then you've got places for the foxes and all the natural wildlife to survive alongside us. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. We can live together comfortably.
So what you're saying is if I make some changes, that will be better. But the other option for me is just to level this bit, get a road through it. People can then move from place to place, nice and easily. I can have the farm on each side. All my pigs can be taken from there to the slaughterhouse, and then the food then gets to people. The trucks can get on it easier. I can get more jobs. What's wrong with that?
Right, let's go for pollution first of all. We've already talked about global warming, do you remember?
No, but yeah, alright, when you get hotter than that. Like now.
So, poor little Mr. Polar Bear, you see him?
Yeah.
Right, he's losing his habitat because of your global warming caused by all this pollution and stuff, and therefore he's moving south into Canada and coming and actually causing harm to people. They'd much prefer he stayed where he was and you weren't damaging the climate. Take poor little Mr. Rhino. Some species of rhino, there's only a few hundred of them left in the wild. So we're having to use captive breeding programs and loads of people and loads of money to try and save them, because you're taking too much of their land. So they're losing their natural habitat. Some species of tiger, we don't even know yet if the captive breeding will be able to keep them from going extinct. So we can keep all this biodiversity, we can keep all these magnificent species of animal on the planet for future generations. I don't want my grandchildren reading about something that used to exist called a rhinoceros. I'd rather they saw them.
Yeah, I get that, but you know, we've got our needs. So, and all these endangered animals and stuff, I get it. At the end of the day, I like pigs.
I know you like pigs. You've mentioned pigs quite a lot today already. But I think the thing is, if we do it in a sustainable way, like we talked about deforestation, if we're taking some trees and planting them,
I
if we're
remember
taking,
that.
you remember that?
Yeah, we took
Whoa.
this one, and then
You're like my year 10s, you can learn.
we planted one, and then it grew back, and then I wouldn't take that one then, I'd take another one, and then
Grow another one, yeah?
that was a good
So if we
idea,
do the
that.
same with the animals, so if you do sustainable farming, and if you do some hedgerows amongst your pigs and stuff, so there's wild creatures in there as well, we keep the biodiversity and we keep the stable community. And then what we also do is we preserve some areas of land for those wild creatures to keep. We've got more than enough land, as I keep telling you.
Yeah.
So we cut down on pollution, we have captive breeding programs for endangered animals, we introduce hedgerows back. The future's bright for the future generations, and it hasn't all been ruined in just 100 years.
Oh, I feel like I've been a bit of a swine today.
Are you going to become a good man in the next episode?
Mate, I'm feeling that way, but I don't know, my soul is dark and I like pigs.
I think we can convert you and we can be the good men.
Well, for me, biodiversity means there are loads and loads of different insects and things for me to eat. But if there's less biodiversity, there might not be enough food. And if something happens to one of them, there'll be even less, and then, well, I might go hungry.
And now maintaining biodiversity. So at this point, I think it's important that we go to another example, a video. Wow, hopefully he'll become a good man. Well, we'll find out next time, won't we? So, 4 ways that we are reducing or impacting on biodiversity, and in your own words, what's meant by conservation. So there's the 4 ways. You could have paused on the previous bit there or go back. And conservation means keeping, conserving. So the preservation of ecosystems and organisms. If you're working in conservation and keeping the rainforest the way it is, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to preserve it, keep it that way for future generations. And talked a little bit in the video about breeding programs, and we talked about, well, talked about rhino and we talked about tiger. And because these are endangered species, hopefully we've caught them early enough, and many zoos have breeding programs. And when you watch some of these zoo programs on telly, they'll sometimes say that this animal has moved from this zoo somewhere in Europe or gone off to a zoo in America. And so by moving the animals around and pairing them up, encouraging them to reproduce, hopefully sometimes reintroducing them to the wild, we will actually be able to stop these species going extinct. And that's the aim of these breeding programs. And talked a little bit in the conversation with Mr. O'Neill about these. Sorry, hedgerows. So actually you can have farmlands and still keep some of the natural wildlife. So having hedgerows with bushes and thorns and blackberry bushes and flowers, and actually a habitat there for a lot of the natural wildlife to still live in, rather than all being destroyed. Sorry, just turn something off. And talked a little bit in the deforestation lesson about this. Instead of continually taking from the environment and using everything up, the idea of reusing, recycling, so the stuff we've already got, making the most of it and repurposing it when it's finished. Lots of us now, most people will recycle plastic, cardboard, paper. That's all collected separately, and when you go to one of the local tips, or when you go to a waste centre, it usually tells you outside things like 90% of the materials here were recycled last month. And then we've got protection. So some of the best coral reefs on the planet and some of the wetlands and mangrove swamps and heathland, some of that now is under protection orders, and there's large areas in England that are designated areas that are protected. So you can't build houses in them, you can't build industry in them, and actually the amount of traffic and people visiting there is limited as well. The coral reefs, etc., being damaged by boats and people doing water sports. Now there's quite a lot of money in ecotourism, so people paying to go scuba diving and actually not causing damage there, but just going to look at the beauty of it and appreciating it. So please try these questions. It says 60 seconds at the top, but you've paused now anyway. And then to check them, we can use breeding programs for the endangered species. We'll need less landfill and destroying less habitats if we're recycling more. Hedgerows around the edge of fields to increase the biodiversity in the natural habitat. And we had those 4 that I suggested earlier on. You look up what they are if you didn't know what they were. Okay.